Hello and welcome everybody to this special edition of Sustainable LATAM, a podcast that focuses on the geopolitics in the region. Sustainable LATAM analyze the political, social, and economic trends in Latin America and where are heading those trends in the region and the context that is happening in a very and constant changing world. Today, as always, I have with me Andrew Thompson and Julian Seydoux, my co-presenters of this podcast. Hello, my friends, and thank you for being with me today. Let's begin with the special edition today, Venezuela. We have all wake up on January the 3rd with the news that the U.S. initiated a military operation in Venezuela, a very quick and very efficient operation in Venezuela that has captured or kidnapped the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. Today, Nicolás Maduro is in U.S. custody in New York City with his wife, being accused of drug trafficking and all a series of charges against him related with drug trafficking and organized crime. President Trump has hailed this operation as a very huge success, has already said openly that the U.S. is going to run the country in one way or another, although it's not clarifying how, has given a lot of hints what is going to happen. Basically, is telling that the U.S. now is managing the game, and that goes in line with this, with the current U.S. policy towards the region. So let's begin with the discussion, and I would like to begin with one thing. So far, until just a year ago, a couple of years ago, we always were talking about international law, that any military operation has to do under UN sanctions or some kind of agreement, or when there are real risks to the world, but there has to be some kind of international consensus around. In this case, the U.S. acts very quickly, soft, not even informing its own allies, although everybody was waiting something happens because of the build-up in the past weeks or months, but nobody expects such a quick operation in that way. And that raised the question across several leaders across the world, in supporting or rejecting, but there a huge question coming around that, the legality of this operation. And Andrew, I would like to begin with you. How legal can be considered this operation, and what is changing now with this new way of acting of the U.S. military?
I think the main change is that Trump, in his second presidency, is following his argument, which says that what the U.S. wants is the most important thing. The U.S. is exceptional in that it can ignore rules that apply to other less powerful countries, and that the world, in the Trump view of the world, is that it's divided up into spheres of influence. And in the case of the Western Hemisphere, that is the US prime sphere of influence, ranging from Greenland through Canada, down through the Panama Canal, and now into Venezuela, which are all areas where the Washington administration has said, basically, we will do what we want. Obviously, there are reservations and criticisms of this approach within the United States itself. Many Democratic congressmen and a few Republicans are saying Congress was not consulted in any meaningful way, and it should have been consulted before a government starts a military operation overseas. So I think, just to give it a bit more background, it's worth mentioning that all this came from the original Monroe Doctrine back in the 1820s, when the doctrine says that no foreign power should intervene in Western Hemisphere affairs. There's also what they call the Roosevelt corollary, which is that the US seizes for itself the power to act as international policeman in the Western Hemisphere. And in fact, it's been doing it. I did a little bit of background research. Over the last 75 years, US military have invaded countries in the Western Hemisphere around 6 times. That includes one unsuccessful invasion of Cuba, the Bay of Pigs in 1961, right up to the invasion of Panama back in 1989. However, you could simplify and say every 10 years there has been a US military intervention of some kind in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, this incursion into Venezuela is probably the first in just more than 1 decade. So this is a very significant point we're at right now.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, I'll come with this question. Obviously, we're seeing a changing game in the geopolitical world. It's not anymore that the old rules apply. That has been crumbling in the last few years, but I think with the intervention of the US now, coming with the new US security doctrine, that is this new Monroe Doctrine, clearly has changed the game, and we have the view of Trump going around that. But are we now in the area of power games? Julian, I'm asking you in that area, how is this new game going around that, and what can the US expect to gain with this intervention?
Hi, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So it's, we discussed this previously in the previous podcast, and we highlighted, following the publishing of the document of the NSS, document how important Latin America was for the Trump administration. Andrew mentioned it at the beginning, which is absolutely true. I think we need to look at a variety of things happening at the same time, and so we talk about Venezuela used to be a very close ally to Russia and China, but Russia was fairly important there. Now, at the same time as Trump has, or the US administration or the US has gone in to take Maduro, the US is imposing with Russia effectively some negotiation about Ukraine. Just before New Year's Eve, or during the last week, at the same time, the US went to talk to last month, or can't remember exactly when. The US went to talk to Xi Jinping as well, and just over the last few days, Xi Jinping announced on national TV, or on one of the biggest forum, that the inevitability of Taiwan rejoining the China sphere. So if we take these three things at the same time, for me it tells a lot about what's going on in terms of the power play. We could assume, and this could be seen as assumption, of course, but nothing to back it up. But Trump did talk to these two big players just before this happening, which is a substantial move by any measure. At the same time, there was these pictures on the day of the US attack, or the US just before he was taken, that Maduro had met with the Chinese delegation. Now, devil's advocate would say that, well, if deals had been made before, then that's a very good way to know exactly where Maduro is going to be at a given point, or at a given time. Is this happening or not? I have absolutely no idea. But when I think about these three major events, major things, I think power is really back on the table. I don't, there's a lot of commentators talking, and we are talking about international law. It's just stopped completely. If there was any evidence of this, we have it now. Everyone needs to think about how they will act going forward, and the consequences about what they are doing in this new world that we've entered. Of course, for when we look at the interest of China into Venezuela, they made billions of loans. They probably most of them have been supporting the government's infrastructure. They are present, but not. It's not something that I wouldn't see. This as being a primary concern to them. They lose an ally, perhaps in the region. Russia is too weak, in my opinion, to deal with this situation in any case, and so we have to look into what does it say about the rest of Latin America. As we discussed previously, we have several elections coming up. These will be very interesting to watch.
That you mentioned a really important point is we have been seeing at this moment the international reaction of probably the global powers going around that. I will just finish from what you're saying, Julian, by reading something that has come in America's Quarterly yesterday by Ryan Berg. Ryan Berg is director of the Americans Programs and head of the Future of Venezuela initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the U.S. He mentioned China. Basically, and quote here, it says, the U.S. operation contains several important implications for long-term regional geopolitics. First, it signals that the Trump corollary outlined in the recent national security strategy is not mere bluster. Maduro met with a Chinese special envoy mere hours before U.S. forces snatched him from his home. There is a speculation that Chinese diplomats did not make it out of the country in time before the U.S. operation began. This is quite a message for China, which has lent more money than any other U.S. adversary to the Venezuelan regime. Second, at the press conference, Trump affirmed that America First foreign policy means building a safer, more prosperous, and more secure hemisphere. Basically saying America is for the Americans and wiping out the Chinese influence in that way. That's the opinion of.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think well, for Venezuela, as I said, I think it's a low stake for the Chinese. Venezuela is not so, it's not so important. And here, I think it's, you just highlighted what I mentioned even earlier, and what you're saying is ringing, making me think a lot about, how you succeed into an operation that they've conducted, which is a really high stake. Lots of, I can just imagine planning for the military operation that it takes is incredible. We heard that in October, I think last year, that Trump was giving authorization for the CIA to be implicated in Venezuela, or to start, making moves over there. And there's probably lots of people implicated within the Venezuelan administration. We don't know who's taking money, who's been bribed or not. I will remind everyone that one of the first acts of the Trump administration was to get rid of the bribery act that we have in the UK, but that doesn't exist anymore in the US. That has a lot of meaning about the way that US companies corporations and the US by itself can act around the world. So absolutely, I think there's a but for me, Venezuela is low stake for China. It's not really that important. As I said before, it could even conceive that possibly there was a deal made. The Latin America is for Trump. Anything within Chinese sphere is for the Chinese, and anything close to Russia is for the Russians. That's basically my right now the take I take on this. What's interesting at the same time is what are the noise that are being made in Iran and so on. But these are that this is outside of our concern right now. But there are several moving parts. But I think these three things are quite important. And then we'll see how it plays out for the rest of the subcontinent. For the rest of South America, it's a lot more difficult to go in and do a similar act to have a repeat. And at the same time, the implication of how this is managed afterwards. I think, when the administration says they will run the country, how are they going to run the country?
Yeah, you're mentioning key points here, and that's where we're going. So we're seeing what is happening at the global geopolitics, and we are in a new era of power games around that. But in the region, there are implications as well. And I will remind something that Trump has been saying during his press conference. Basically, he made a stark warning against Gustavo Petro in Colombia, basically telling him, behave, or it's going to happen to you as well. There are a clear division across the Latin American political spectrum from countries like Brazil, Mexico, Chile, openly criticizing with certain level of degree. Mexico probably criticized, but has been a little bit more moderate because of the closeness of Mexico with the U.S. But on the other side, an open support from Ecuador and Argentina. But clearly there is a line in the region. And here is the question: what is now the implications for the rest of Latin America, especially in South America? Andrew, how do you see that?
Well, I think most countries in Latin America have been given a very eloquent lesson, a bit of a sermon from the Trump administration. And that is, if we take the examples, obviously what's just happened in Caracas. But before that, Trump intervened quite blatantly in the Honduran general elections, saying just before the election who he favored to be the next president, and then announcing a pardon for the former Honduran president who was involved in drug trafficking. So the message I would say to most Latin American countries is, watch out. If you have elections coming up, that would be Peru early this year, followed by various other countries. Brazil in October of this year. Expect President Trump to intervene blatantly and to pick his favored candidates. So in Brazil, the question will be, will Donald Trump do something to help the Bolsonaro candidate, who is likely at the moment, I mean, everything may change, but let's say the far right-wing candidate, will he try and tip the balance in favor of Bolsonaro's son or whoever is the candidate? And that is quite a worrying outlook. It also means, Panama will be under continuing pressure over who it licenses to operate its ports, pressure from Trump to reduce the Chinese presence there. And other countries will find similar problems. In the case of Venezuela, there will be a particular focus on developing oil, and Trump made it pretty clear for the benefit of the United States, although he suggested there was enough to be earned to help the country as well. But the regional politics, being in the Trump sphere of influence, has become more difficult for Latin American countries and will continue to be tricky.
Indeed, that's a really clear point, Andrew. Just call me a question for me in my mind, a little bit the idealistic mind, if you want to comment and asking both of you around that, is what is the U.S. expecting now to gain? President Trump in his press conference has openly says that they are going after Venezuelan oil, that they want to, in some way, to control that. We're going to make Venezuela great again, but we are going to charge all all the oil that, in theory, Venezuela has robbed the U.S. in the past or something like that, going around that. So this is one point. And the other element that I'm asking in the other list is just oil, or really Trump is looking only for oil? But what happened with democracy? What is going to happen with the opposition? What kind of transition are we looking, or what is going to happen now in Venezuela?
I think it's, again, going back to our discussion previously on the NSS document, there's huge demand from the US for energy demands and rare earth minerals and so on. So, and I think that's the primary. I think if we step back, that's just the primary reason they're going inside, and just ensuring that these oil reserves, which is the biggest in the world, become available for the US to power the economy and the energy demands that they need, but also as a way to possibly have influence over energy across other countries, from Russia or from the Middle East, because it will have an impact on oil prices if all of the reserves go back into the market. Suddenly, the US is a power player in the same way as OPEC. So for just strictly on business terms, so if we look back at the economy, then is this good for Venezuela? Most probably, because they've lost 75 to 80% of their GDP over the past 10 years or so, and we could see a revival of things, and certainly the financial markets do believe this is have started making money out of this, because Venezuelan bonds have been the prices are going back up over the past couple of months. So the people have adjusted to this new reality of this. On a purely economic matter, on the political factor, does he care who he deals with? Well, I don't think the administration, what they're asking for is they want to have access, primarily a first basis access, privileged access to some resources, probably, and be it in whatever way that is necessary. And are they so concerned about democracy? Maybe they will play they will pretend and do whatever. But if we think that the international law and the world former post-World War order is gone, then no. I mean, it's all about who's going to be there in control and doing things. We could even imagine that the entire country goes down into, which is, I think, would be a really bad scenario, but it completely breaks up, and then just see pockets of influence across Venezuela, war limits, call it this way, with deals with oil oil manufacturers or big oil companies and so on. That's a possibility as well. I'm not sure exactly how. This is why when he says I will run the country, we will be us will run the country, it becomes really unclear to me, because here this is where it gets a bit messier than right now.
Based on that, go ahead, Andrew, please.
The press conference that Trump gave yesterday was quite something, in my opinion. And one of the issues that struck me was that it was about an hour-long press conference. The word democracy was hardly ever mentioned. And it is also clear there were presidential elections in Venezuela last year, won by Mundo González Urrutia. And because it's internationally accepted that he was the real winner of the elections and there were fraud, you might think of his name at the point when you're thinking of a transitional government to manage a political change in Venezuela. But he wasn't particularly mentioned, and Trump sort of sidelined Ana María Machado, saying that she didn't have as much support as would be needed. And it looks as if the Washington team is going to work with a group of Chavistas, and in particular the vice president, Delcy Rodríguez, who's now being officially declared transitional president by the Venezuelan Supreme Court. So it does seem that the respect for democracy and a system of rules, which is valued in Latin America and in Europe, is coming under significant challenge, and that democracy is not that important to Donald Trump when compared to business opportunities and anything which will expand the power and the influence of the United States.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We can say it's all about business and what I can gain regarding of power of and influence. And I think the conference has showed that. And to reinforce that, I invite our audience to read today an article in New York Times today that has been talking a little bit about this. The interesting thing is an article in the New York Times that came today, written by Anatoly Kurmanev, Tyler Pager, Simon Romero, and Julia Turkewitz. They are NYT journalists. They are very good. But the interesting thing is they were mentioned Delcy Rodríguez several times. And apparently, in line of all of this, Delcy Rodríguez, the vice president, has been shown in the past a pragmatic approach. She is basically seen as the one who reestablished certain level of growth in the Venezuelan economy after all the fiasco. Some in the article says they come from a corrupt socialism model to a corrupt capitalist model. Corrupt, yes, but it's capitalist in that way. But the image that she presents out there, and apparently something that they like in the American administration, is somebody you can talk with. It's more pragmatic approach, as they say, a more professional conversation rather than they can have with Maduro, that was more ideological. Are we expecting probably new elections? Some people are saying that probably in the line is the message that Trump has been giving yesterday. I see there's on social media several analyses going around that saying, okay, the American administration is telling, we are prepared to talk now with this new vice president if they are open to do what we want from Venezuela. Also make clear that says, don't make mistakes. We run the game. It's not your game anymore. So you have to do what we want. If not, you can prepare another military intervention. Trump was very clear on that.
Second wave.
Yeah. And
yeah, but this is, I think this is more. This is where I think that you have more talk than the second wave. Let's take a scenario. I like scenarios.
Yeah.
Let's take a scenario that for whatever reason they decide to go in and bring a second wave. 15% of the military forces in the region. They go in. Tens of thousands of soldiers go inside, and for whatever reason you have. We understand that in that part of the world, people go into the jungle. They form military, military alliances. You have people who have been trained. You have soldiers inside. They have local knowledge. It's not. It's in the history of things. We've seen this before in other places. It's never good for an invader to come in. What I think this scenario is just a lose-lose, but would be a really, really bad scenario all by itself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think the U.S. It was more rhetoric around that, but I think the message was to the militaries, and that's an element that we have to get. The real power player in Venezuela is the army. Without the support of the army, the Chavistas cannot be in power at this moment.
Yeah, and I think this is. I think absolutely, and I think this is where deals have been made somewhere.
Exactly, and that's why I think this administration is supporting now the current vice president around that. From what I read through New York Times, American Quarterly, and different analysts all going across, and with common sense going around that. Why the Trump administration didn't support the winner of the elections in 2024, or Corina Machado, who is the clear, the visible voice of the opposition, is because in a way, the civil opposition that has been going through never have the support of the army, a key player on this game. And without the army, I don't think Trump was trying to be diminished against Corina Machado. I think what he was trying to say is, without the army, you cannot govern the country. And probably it's much easier to deal with somebody like Delcy Rodríguez from a pragmatic point of view, as long as they align with the U.S. operation. We will see what is going to happen. But it sounds to me that, as we all recognize, this is not about democracy. This is about influence and power. And in that, the big loser on all of this is probably the democratic movement in Venezuela for the time being. I don't know if there is going to be a transition, which comes to my next question to both of you. Around what can we expect now from Venezuela in the future before we finish the podcast today? Let's begin with you, Andrew. What can we expect now?
I think that we have all been dazzled by the efficiency of the US military operation to kind of be tempted to think all the major problems have been solved. And of course, all the major problems have not been solved. And I think what we will expect on the short term will be a lot of maneuvering to try and create a coalition which supports change and reform that, if you like, is being forced physically onto the Venezuelan scene by the appearance of the U.S. armed forces. Now, having done that, who's actually going to run the country? Which generals will be acceptable, and which generals will be facing trial? That's very unclear. And the thing that keeps coming back to me is the, I think, justified criticism made of the United States in Iraq, where they had no plan for day two. They needed to rely on some elements of the old regime, of the Ba'athist regime, to run the country. And they hadn't planned or thought of that, as a result of which they got bogged down in Iraq in what Trump has said is one of those forever wars. And part of Trump's electoral promises was to end the forever wars and not have long drawn out military involvements in any other part of the world. Now, at the moment, it's possible that the situation in Venezuela will be fairly benign, and it will be a great victory, one for democracy, at the hands of the US armed forces. But there is a real danger that factionalism will emerge. There'll be a break within Chavismo. Different groups want different things. Yeah. In a context of a country which has lost 80% of its GDP in the last 5 years, where there are, if you put up petrol prices, which at some moment you'll have to do, there may be protests on the streets which could turn violent, as they have in the past in Venezuelan history. So the specter, or the negative scenario in which it all becomes a lot more complicated for the Trump administration is, I think, a real concern, a real risk.
Julian.
No, I completely agree with Andrew. I mean, this is right. So I completely agree with Andrew on all the dangers, certainly, and all of those things. And also stepping back to my earlier comment on China, is exactly that. Is everyone, once you've done the calculation, it's like, okay, this is low stake for me. I know so much, and this can be a real problem for them to deal with afterwards. I would caveat this in one sense that contrary, or I don't know if contrary, but the evidence has been so far that, from my point of view, that is, that the Trump administration has a plan, or has had a plan across many things, and have always moved. The people behind him have always been moving ahead of these plans, and then there has been an execution, which I think when we think about the execution of in terms of how they dealt with this capture is truly astounding. But that's not the only one. That's not the only one that we discussed in this podcast before, but that we've witnessed around the thing. So I'm at this present moment, I don't have all the information. We don't have all the information. But the next few weeks, we'll see more and more about what actually is the plan of the Trump administration. What has been, say the CIA went in and did some negotiation over the past few months with a variety of people. What have they been, promised? How are some of the various corporation or actors moving in, or what are they? What's the plan there, etc. So I would say, there is a plan. Whether it is successful or not, that's another. I think that's and I think all the points around you raise are really valid, because it's a high stake. It could be a high stake plan, but the execution of the next stages are critical for even for how Trump is perceived in these media elections coming along in the US, how and for the rest of his and the rest of his influence in Latin America. You can go and threaten all the others and all the other countries and even say we'll do this, we'll do that, but right now, watching what's going on, how they will deal with that situation, I think is actually really critical for the plan developed under the NSS document.
With this, it's really important. I will just finish with one observation or one general question going around that, because yes, the Trump administration clearly has a plan, has been acting accordingly. The NSS has shown that there is a lot of reactions. We have mentioned Latin America. So probably the next question that is going to open, or at least we will have to keep a real close eye on what is going to happen in the next elections in the region, beginning with Costa Rica now in February, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela, and Brazil. What is really interesting is especially what is going to happen in Colombia, where I think the Trump administration are going to look for a more friendly government in the future. So probably it's going to we can expect more interference in that area. And probably the next question that is going to rise on around this is what are going to do, or how they are going to react the regional powers in Latin America, ergo Brazil, Mexico. Argentina is clearly aligned now with Trump, but what can we expect, especially for those governments that are not necessarily aligned with the Trump doctrine, like Brazil or Mexico? And this is something that we will have to continue checking in the future, especially for Brazil, which is probably one of the countries that are going to be more affected in one way or another with the Trump doctrine in the region. With that, I think we covered the time, so I'm going to give just a final words to you, Andrew, and to you, Julian, saying Happy New Year to all our audience, and we will continue talking around for different analysis on the region. We can expect in a future number a very good interview that we're going to have with the Vice President of Santander Bank, talking about the economic viability in the region, which I invite you, all of you, to listen to us to this next that is going to come in the coming weeks. Andrew, Julian, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and until the next time.
See you next time.
See you.